He told me that no woman had ever walked away from him and lived a comfortable life afterward. I was already halfway out the door when he said it. That should tell you exactly what kind of man I married. My name is Amara Johnson, and 2 years ago, I became the wife of Kang Do-Hyun, the most feared man in South Korea. Feared in boardrooms, feared in back alleys, feared by men who controlled ports, banks, and politicians, because his name alone could end all three in a single phone call. For 2 years, I lived in a penthouse with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city I never truly belonged to. I had every material comfort a person could want, and I had a husband who never once told me he loved me. Not once. Not on our wedding night. Not on my birthday. Not during the quiet moments when I foolishly believed I saw something soften in his eyes. The night I left, the rain was coming down so hard it sounded like the sky itself was angry with me for staying silent for so long. I stood at the door with one suitcase. Everything else I owned, I left behind because none of it ever really felt like mine anyway. He stood across the room, arms crossed, watching me the way he watched enemies right before he destroyed them. Cold, calculating, certain that if he just waited long enough, I would break first. I would turn around, drop to my knees, and beg him to let me stay. I looked him directly in the eyes, the same eyes that made grown executives go pale in meetings I was never allowed to attend, and I told him 4 words. I deserve to be loved. Then I walked out into the storm. He didn't come after me. Not that night. I remember standing alone in the elevator, soaked to the bone, hands shaking so hard I could barely press the button for the lobby. I thought that was the end of my story. I had absolutely no idea it was only the beginning of his undoing. But to understand how satisfying his unraveling truly was, you need to understand exactly how far I fell before I ever met him. So let me take you back. Back to before the marriage. Back to before the empire. Back to the humiliation that started everything. 3 years before that rainy night, I was nobody in Seoul. Just a 26-year-old architecture graduate from Atlanta, Georgia, who had won an international fellowship to design sustainable housing for a company called Jinsung Development. I thought it was the opportunity of a lifetime. I had no idea that Jinsung was just a small, forgettable piece at the very bottom of a massive empire that stretched from construction to shipping to things that never appeared on paper. An empire that belonged, quietly, to the Kang family. My direct supervisor was a woman named Seo-yeon. Elegant, icy, beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful, cold to the touch, and impossible to hold on to. She was also the former fiancée of Kang Do-Hyun. I didn't know that when I started. I found out the hard way. From my very first day, Seo-yeon made it painfully clear that I did not belong. She would switch into rapid Korean during meetings just to watch me struggle to keep up. She handed me the tasks nobody else wanted, then quietly took credit for the work I stayed awake perfecting until 4 in the morning. She never called me by my name. To her, I was always the black girl from Atlanta. I used to lock myself in the office bathroom just to breathe. In, out. Just breathe, Amara. You didn't fly across the world to fall apart in a bathroom stall in Gangnam. But some days I did fall apart anyway, quietly, where no one could see. The humiliation reached its breaking point 6 months in at the company's annual gala. I had designed the centerpiece project of the entire year, a community housing initiative that would go on to become one of the most celebrated developments the firm ever produced. And Seo-yeon stood on that stage, in front of 300 of Seoul's most powerful people, and presented my work as her own. I stood in the back of that ballroom in a second-hand dress, watching 4 months of my life applauded under someone else's name. When I quietly tried to speak up, just to clarify my contribution, she laughed in my face. Cute, she said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. She really thinks anyone here would believe an outsider like her designed something this refined. The room laughed with her, some out of genuine cruelty, most out of fear, because nobody dared to contradict the Kang, and by extension, nobody dared to contradict the woman who used to be one. My face burned. I wanted the marble floor to swallow me whole. I flew across the world for this. I left my mother crying at the airport, promising her I would make her proud. And here I was, laughed at like a joke in front of the most important people in the city. Was I wrong to come here? Was I wrong to believe I deserved a seat at this table? Humiliated beyond words, I walked out onto the terrace, just to be alone for a moment. I had no idea that single decision would change the entire course of my life. Because standing in the shadows of that terrace was a man the entire ballroom was too terrified to approach. Kang Do-Hyun. He didn't look at me at first. He was simply watching the skyline, wrapped in a black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him instead of reflecting it. I almost turned back inside. Almost. But something about the stillness out there, the distance from the humiliation happening behind me, made me stay. They laughed at the wrong person, he said, in perfect English. I froze. I turned to face him, and for the first time, our eyes actually met. For just a second, something flickered behind that coldness. "Excuse me," I asked. "Your renderings," he said, still facing the skyline. "The community housing project. I reviewed the blueprints myself 3 weeks ago, before they ever reached her desk. The structural adaptations. The passive cooling system built into the rooftop gardens. That wasn't Seo-Yun's work. She doesn't understand load-bearing design. You do." My heart pounded. This man, whoever he was, had seen the truth before anyone else in that ballroom bothered to look. "Who are you?" I asked. He finally turned to face me fully. "Someone who doesn't enjoy watching thieves take credit for genius," he said. Then he walked away, leaving me stunned on that terrace, completely unaware that the man I had just spoken to controlled the very company that employed me and had allowed me to be humiliated inside its walls. I found out exactly who he was 3 days later, when Do-Hyun walked into our office completely unannounced. The entire floor went silent. Executives who barked orders at junior staff all day suddenly couldn't meet his eyes. Seo-Yun, who had laughed so confidently at that gala, turned the color of paper. "Pull every file related to the community housing project," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I want to see every signature, every timestamp, every design revision." Nobody moved, frozen by fear. "Now," he said, and the entire room scattered. That was the moment I truly understood who Kang Do-Hyun was. Not just an executive, not just wealthy, a man whose single sentence could end careers instantly. And somehow, impossibly, he had chosen to use that power for me. I told myself not to read too much into it. Powerful men like him did not fall for women like me. Not in Seoul. Not in a world built on hierarchies I would never fully belong to. But something had shifted, and I could not ignore it. The investigation stretched over 2 weeks. During that time, Do-Hyun called me into his office more than once, not to intimidate me, as I expected, but to ask real questions. About my design philosophy. About growing up in Atlanta. About why I had traveled halfway across the world for a job in a place that clearly did not want me there. During one of those late meetings, something happened that neither of us expected. His grandmother, the family matriarch, a woman feared even more than her own grandson in certain circles, arrived unannounced for a surprise visit to the office. Traditional, exacting, a woman who judged everyone within seconds of meeting them. The entire staff scrambled. Nobody remembered the proper greeting customs quickly enough. Seo-Yun, who prided herself on her elite upbringing, fumbled her bow so badly that the old woman's eyes narrowed in open disapproval. Then she turned to me, the outsider, the one everybody assumed knew absolutely nothing. I bowed at the exact depth reserved for an elder of her stature. I greeted her in fluent, formal Korean, a language I had quietly taught myself for 3 years, ever since I fell in love with Korean cinema back home in Atlanta, never once imagining I would need it like this. I addressed her using the precise honorific reserved specifically for a family matriarch of her generation. The entire room went dead silent. Do-Hyun's grandmother stared at me for a long moment. Then, for the first time all day, she smiled. Finally, she said in Korean, "Someone in this building with manners." I watched Seo-Yun's face crumble in real time. I watched the executives who had mocked me exchange nervous, uncertain glances. And I watched something shift in Do-Hyun's expression, something between shock, quiet pride, and an emotion I could not yet name. He had built walls around himself for 34 years. Walls made of boardrooms, blood debts, and a world that only ever respected fear. And this woman, brilliant, humiliated, quietly fierce, had just bowed to his grandmother with more grace and understanding than anyone born into his world ever had. He didn't know it yet, but that was the moment he stopped seeing me as an employee. That was the moment he started seeing me as his to protect. The investigation confirmed everything. Every design, every innovation, every sleepless night, it all traced directly back to me. Do-Hyun had stolen not just one project, but 11 months of my work, quietly rebranding it under her own name to secure her position after her engagement to Do-Hyun had ended. But it went deeper than professional theft. Do-Hyun discovered that Do-Hyun had been deliberately sabotaging my visa renewal paperwork behind the scenes, hoping to have me deported before I ever had the chance to prove myself. Falsified reports calling my work substandard, quietly sent to immigration liaisons. A calculated, months-long campaign designed to erase me before I ever had the chance to rise. When he laid the evidence out across his desk, I felt my knees go weak. She tried to have me deported, I whispered. Over a housing project. No, Do-Hyun said, his voice low and dangerous. She tried to erase you because she saw exactly what I see now. And what's that? I asked. He stepped closer. For the first time, the coldness in his eyes wasn't pointed at me. It was pointed at the world that had tried so hard to break me. Someone who doesn't need this company's permission to be extraordinary. That night, Do-Hyun personally intervened with the immigration office, a single phone call making problems disappear the way only real power can. He moved me out of the cramped apartment I shared with 3 roommates and into a secured residence, insisting it was purely for the investigation's safety, though we both understood that was not the only reason. For the first time since arriving in Korea, I finally felt safe. If you're loving Amara's story so far, this is exactly the kind of journey we bring you every single week here on AfroKorean Chroniclez. So make sure you're subscribed and staying close, because what happens next completely changes everything. Do-Hyun visited every single evening, at first with updates on the case. Then, slowly, the conversations shifted into something else entirely. Favorite foods, childhood memories, the kind of loneliness neither of us ever admitted to anyone else. I used to think men like him didn't feel anything at all. I used to think that Ice was simply who he was. But I watched him unravel, slowly, one conversation at a time. I watched a man who controlled shipping ports and silenced entire boardrooms with a single glance sit across from me at midnight, quietly asking if the tea was too bitter, if the couch was comfortable enough, if I was homesick. He was learning how to be soft, and somehow, impossibly, I was the reason. One night, after weeks of guarded tension between us, he finally admitted the truth. "I don't know how to do this," he said, staring at the floor like a man twice his age. "Do what?" I asked. "Care about someone without wanting to control every part of protecting them," he said. "In my world, softness gets people killed, but you make me want to be soft anyway." That was the night everything between us changed. Not with fireworks, just 2 exhausted people finally allowing themselves to be honest. 3 months later, we were married. Quietly, privately, far away from cameras and company politics. But marrying Kang Do-Hyun did not mean I married peace. It meant I married into a family who saw me as a stain on their bloodline. His mother, in particular, made her disapproval known every chance she got. Comments about exotic distractions, pointed questions about when her son would finally come to his senses. Do-Hyun shielded me from most of it, but not all of it. And that is exactly why, 2 years later, I stood at her front door with a packed suitcase, soaked from the rain, telling the most feared man in Seoul that I deserved better than being tolerated in silence. I didn't go far that night. A small, anonymous hotel across the city, the kind of place no one would think to look for the wife of Kang Do-Hyun. For 3 days, my phone stayed completely silent. Part of me expected him to come. Some foolish, hopeful part of me believed love like that simply doesn't let you walk into the rain without a fight. But 3 days of silence taught me something important. I'd spent 2 years shrinking myself just to survive in his world. I was done shrinking, even for love. What I didn't know was that Do-Hyun's silence had nothing to do with indifference. He had spent those 3 days tearing his own family's foundation apart. He discovered that his mother had been orchestrating a smear campaign against me for months. He discovered that Seo-yeon, still bitter years after her public downfall, had been secretly feeding his mother the ammunition the entire time. 2 women. One shared goal: erase Amara Johnson from Kang Do-Hyun's life by any means necessary. On the 4th day, an emergency shareholders gala was called. The very same annual event. The very same ballroom. 3 years after the night, I stood there humiliated on that stage. Only this time, I was not hiding in the back of the room. I walked in wearing a gown Do-Hyun had sent to my hotel that morning, along with a single note. Come as exactly who you are. The world is finally ready to see her. I put on that dress, and I walked into that ballroom with my head held high. The room fell silent the moment I entered. Do-Hyun's mother, seated at the head table beside Seo-yeon, went pale. Then Do-Hyun stood. He walked directly to the center of that room and took my hand in front of every single person who had ever doubted me. 3 years ago, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. A woman stood in this exact room and was humiliated for genius this company built its reputation on. I said nothing that night. That was my failure. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Seo-yeon's hand trembled around her champagne glass. Tonight, Do-Hyun continued. I correct that failure completely. He turned to face the board directly. Effective immediately, Seo-yeon is terminated from every position within any company under the Kang name. Evidence of her fraud, her sabotage of an employee's immigration status, and her attempted destruction of my marriage has already been forwarded to the appropriate legal authorities. Seo-yeon shot to her feet. Do-Hyun, you can't. I can, he said, cutting her off without ever raising his voice. And I have. Then he turned to his mother. Mother, I have spent my entire life protecting this family's name, even when it meant protecting cruelty. I built an empire so none of you would ever have to answer to anyone. But you used that protection to try to destroy the one person who ever made me feel like more than a name on company letterhead. You will issue a public apology to my wife, or you will no longer be welcome at any family function, any board meeting, or any property bearing the Kang name. The choice is yours. But know this, I have already chosen her. The silence in that ballroom was unlike anything I had ever experienced. 3 years earlier, I had stood in that exact spot, humiliated into silence. Now, the silence belonged entirely to them. Do-Hyun turned to me, and for the first time in front of everyone who ever doubted us, his cold expression completely melted away. I told you once that they laughed at the wrong person, he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. I should have told you the rest of it too. They doubted the wrong person. And I let you walk into the rain because I was too proud to say what I should have said months ago. I love you, Amara. Not because you're brilliant, though you are. Not because you survived a world that tried to erase you, though you did that too. I love you because you never once asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am. And I am asking you now, in front of everyone who ever made you feel small, stay. Not because you need to beg, because I am the one begging. Tears blur my vision. Every humiliation, every cold dinner, every whispered insult I had swallowed for 2 years rose to the surface all at once. I already left once, I said, my voice steady despite the tears. I won't regret that decision. But I'm not staying because you're begging, Do-Hyun. I'm staying because for the first time, you're choosing me the way I always deserve to be chosen. Loudly, publicly, without apology. He pulled me into his arms in front of the very people who once laughed at me. The applause that followed was not polite corporate applause. It was the sound of an entire room watching justice unfold in real time. Within a month, Seo-yeon's name was quietly erased from every industry she once dominated. Her reputation left in complete ruin. Do-Hyun's mother, humiliated in front of Seoul's elite, issued her apology publicly, hollow and forced, but undeniable. And I was named lead design director of Kang Development's newest international division, the very project Seo-yeon once stole credit for, now permanently and publicly attached to my name. I traded a second-hand gala dress and a bathroom stall full of quiet tears for a seat at the head of the table. I traded silence for a husband who says I love you every single morning, out loud, without hesitation. They thought I would beg to stay. Instead, I walked into the rain, and his entire world came crashing down until the only thing left standing was me. If this story moved you the way it moved me telling it, make sure you're subscribed to AfroKorean Chroniclez, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here. Love that refuses to stay small. Justice that always finds its way home. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who needs to remember their worth today. And I will see you in the next story.